Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Now we start this hour with the breaking news. In a major blow to President Donald Trump, the United States Supreme Court has struck down his sweeping global tariffs imposed under the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act. In a 6-3 ruling, the justices upheld lower court decisions that found Trump exceeded his authority by invoking emergency powers to impose tariffs without congressional approval. The Constitution grants Congress, not the President, the authority to levy taxes and tariffs. Trump had used IEEPA to justify tariffs on nearly every major U.S. trading partner, calling trade deficits and drug trafficking national emergencies. The ruling follows legal challenges from small businesses and 12 U.S. states, most led by Democrats. Economists estimate more than $175 billion was collected under the IEEPA-based tariffs, funds that may now need to be refunded. The decision has significant implications for executive power, global trade, and the future of U.S. tariff policy. Now for this, we welcome Mr. Sharad Kohli. He's a senior economist, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Mr. Kohli, for joining us on this very timely news. Now, what would be the latest or, the first significant implications for this?
Well, good evening, Asuma.
Good evening.
To you and the viewers. I think very landmark judgment. If you ask me personally speaking, I've been following up this news for a very long time. And I had an inkling that this is going to be, the lower court orders are going to be upheld because the tariffs were illegal per se. If you look at the U.S. emergency powers under which a Senate approval, congressional approval is a must, whereas President Trump had gone ahead and implemented under the IAPEA, whatever laws, but somehow it did not come the test of law and it just failed the test of law. Now this is going to really complicate the situations because all the imports coming into the U.S. from most of the countries, even some of the closest allies of US, they have been under tariffs, ranging anything from 15% to 50% to 34% to 54%. I mean, all sorts of numbers. Now, we should not forget that these tariffs were being levied on the importers. These tariffs were being levied once the goods landed in America. Now, as for the Supreme Court ruling, this amount needs to be refunded. Now, President Trump had, in fact, if you ask me, a lot of investments, a lot of expenditure had been planned on the basis of this revenue, additional revenue, shall I say, which was coming into the US. Now, a refund would mean that US will seriously run into a financing crisis because the budgets have been planned accordingly. The budget has been declared accordingly. Now, with this amount going back to the, to the importers, I mean, this is going to create crisis for the US government for the fund flows. So I think it's a very complicated situation. And knowing President Trump, he's not going to take this lying low. I mean, he will definitely try and find out some other way to get past this and make sure that his plans which he had made for various reasons. I mean, the logic given by him was that this is US has got a huge trade deficit. Well, in the process, he forgot that US is no more the factory of the world. It used to be many years ago. And, in the modern times, each country is dependent on others, for their imports. So the world is one family, it's one big village. And President Trump, was very upset about the fact that US is not manufacturing, hence he levied tariffs to cut down the deficit. And then he wanted to generate more revenue for the American economy. We should not forget that the American economy right now is in a debt of about $39 trillion, which is a lot of money. The debt to GDP ratio is almost 130%. So I think how is President Trump now going to, pacify the MAGA, the Make America Great Again lobby, which was behind him in this whole process? How is he going to pacify them? What is he going to do? I think we will be knowing very soon, probably tonight, or today, shall I say, in the American day, as the day breaks there now. I think there'll be a bit of a flutter amongst the Republicans as to what is to be done. But we should also not forget, Usuma, that a lot of Republicans were not in favor of these tariffs. It was just that the inner coterie, the inner lobby, which was in favor of these tariffs. More importantly, how is he going to plan? Because the GDP numbers of America came only yesterday night, and the GDP has dropped from 4.4% in the previous quarter to the fourth quarter of 2025. It has dropped to 1.4%, which is a very, very significant drop, primarily because of the shutdown which happened in the month of October and November. So I think it's bad news for America, first from for the GDP front, and now the tariffs being held illegal. I think President Trump is going to have a very difficult day. And knowing him, I'm sure something is going to come out which will probably be even more damaging or would be an alternate to this, because I think the countries around the world would have heaved a sigh of relief, because this was impacting the exports from other countries into the US, which has been going on for decades, Asuma.
Yes, and as you have already touched down upon, but what are the broader political consequences of this decision for the balance of power between White House and Congress, particularly regarding trade and tariff policy?
Well, we all know that there are midterm elections,
Yes.
Suma, later this year in November 2026. America is going to go through midterm elections. And I think his approval ratings have come down from 43 to 34%. So as this, the congressional support which he had was falling down. Now the differences between the White House and the Congress are going to widen from here. I'm sure, this is going to cause, as I said, a flutter amongst Republicans as well. And he will have to go and face the electorate, now with most of them not supporting the tariff. And it's important to note that even a lot of importers in the US were not supporting the tariffs because it was fueling inflation, although the inflation numbers were being shown otherwise, but there were no investments coming into the US. The job market was very, very tight. Inflation on certain front was more, although, the numbers being projected, I really do not trust those numbers. But as per him, inflation was under control. But the real situation on ground was that every time an American was going to buy groceries, he was facing inflation. Things used to be more expensive. It was bleeding his wallets. That was the situation on ground. So I think one needs to very closely watch what happens today in America and what is President Trump's next move. Because I remember when he was asked this question, that what happens if Supreme Court reverses your tariff, what do you do? He says, I'll find some other way out. I still remember his words. So we need to wait and see as to what he does. But for now, if the Supreme Court judgment remains in vogue, and if this is held tight, then a sigh of relief for nations, a sigh of relief for importers, and a sigh of relief for American citizens as well, who were facing expensive goods every time they went to buy from the grocery shop for garments, for leather, for footwear, gems, jewelry, chemicals, pharmaceuticals. There was a long list of stuff that American citizens were using, which they were now getting more expensive, because I think someone missed the point that tariffs basically meant that you are putting more load on your own citizens as far as their pockets are concerned. Very interesting situation, I would say. And one needs to keep a watch on what happens in America during the day today, Asuma.
Yes, 100%. Thank you very much, Mr. Kohli, for sharing
Thank
that
you.
insight. We'll also welcome now Professor David K. Johnston. He's a professor at Rochester Institute of Technology, joins us live from New York. Thank you very much, Mr. and Professor Johnston, for joining us again. Good to see you. I was just talking with our respective other guest, Mr. Kohli, and he highlighted now Trump's reaction. We will be watching what would be his reaction, and he said maybe Trump will come up with something which may have end up affecting or further deteriorating the situation. What's your take?
Well, Donald will not take this at all well, and I say that having known and studied him now for almost 40 years. He will shortly announce, or he'll have Kevin Hassett, his chief economic policy advisor, say that we have a backup plan and we have another plan. It's going to be just as good. It'll be just as good. It's going to be the golden age of America, because he lives in this mythical world in his head. But this is a very significant development. The Supreme Court signaled during the hearing before the court in November several of the conservative justices that the Constitution is very clear. The power to tax is held only by Congress, not by the president. And now they're going to have to refund all of these tariffs, unfortunately, to the degree that American consumers paid higher prices and foreign operatives or foreign companies had fewer sales, which hurt their profits and workers. That's too bad. There's no way to really fix that. But there will be massive refunds, and hopefully trade with India will rebound. In January, Indian trade with the U.S. Goods trade, which is largely pharmaceuticals, it was down 22% in January compared to a year earlier.
Yes, and talking about India and many countries, what will happen with, okay, let's look at India and US relations. So what will happen with India and US relations now that, because of President Trump, India even changed, because of all the tariff threats, India even changed its foreign policy. It was buying more oil from Russia, and then it moved to buying less oil from Russia, and now was pushed to buy oil from Venezuela through US. What will happen to all this?
Well, the U.S. will continue to lean on India to not buy Russian oil, to buy we call it oil in Venezuela. It's also called pudding. It is on its way to being coal. It's pretty much dried out. And Trump and his administration will continue to try to push India around, as he is every other country in the world. I mean, remember, Donald said, I run the country in the whole world, and he has said, I have an Article 2, referring to the presidential section of the American economy. I have an Article 2 that says I can do anything I want. It says nothing of the kind, but it's how he thinks. And so whatever at the moment Donald believes he will get him some advantage that will glorify him as the great leader, that's what he's going to do. And on that, he's mercurial. I mean, we don't know and we can't tell.
Right. And what are the broader political consequences of this decision for U.S. for the balance of power between the White House and Congress, particularly regarding trade and tariff policy?
Well, one of the reasons the Supreme Court issued this split ruling, 6-3, was the concern that the president was not only usurping the sole power of Congress to tax, but that if he got away with this, that it would be the president in the future, that no veto-proof Congress, which was a 2/3 members of the Congress, would overturn actions of the president. And it's certainly in the current Congress, very closely split in both the House and the Senate. There's no chance of overcoming any veto by Donald Trump. So what the court has done here is restored the constitutional order. Members of Congress in the Republican Party have all relinquished the duties of their offices to bow down to Donald Trump. That's something I did not expect when Trump came into office the first time. I expected they would stand up for their institutions. They have not. And this may further weaken Trump's grip on the Republican Party. His threats that if you dare challenge me, I will find some candidate in the primary election, that's the party picking its representatives, and get rid of you. And that has intimidated a lot of members of Congress and the Senate, even though in doing so, they violate their oath of office. And this is one of the most troubling developments, that so many politicians will violate their oath of office because they're concerned they'll be voted out, especially given the fact that more than 1 million people have died for the idea of the American constitutional government, and many people have had their lives ruined, like my father, who was a 100% disabled veteran of World War II. So I expect this will send a pretty strong signal to Trump's lawyers that you cannot entirely act as a dictator. He's dictatorial in many ways, but you're going to get reined in by the conservatives on the Supreme Court together with the liberals, and you're only going to get at most the 3 votes of people who have made it.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Johnston, for sharing that. We have another breaking news coming in. U.S. markets have surged after the Supreme Court struck down most of President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs imposed under the International Economic Emergency Powers Act. Within minutes of the ruling, the S&P 500 reversed earlier losses of climbed 0.5%, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq jumped 0.6%, reflecting strong investor confidence. Bond markets also reacted sharply. Yields rose across maturities, with the benchmark 10-year Treasury climbing to 4.09% and the 30-year yield advancing to 4.74%. Meanwhile, the US dollar strengthened against major currencies, including the British pound, the euro, and Japanese yen, signaling that investors are viewing the court's decision as a boost to economic stability and US assets. Now we welcome Dr. Jayjit Bhattacharya. He's an economist and policy expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Dr. Bhattacharya, for joining us. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, how do you interpret this immediate surge of, the S&P 500 and Nasdaq, also following the Supreme Court's latest decision?
And clearly, the way the market is interpreting this development is that there will be healing of the economic linkages again, which essentially means that there will be growth back in the global markets and therefore in the US also. The US has been hobbled by higher cost of raw materials, of depressed demand because of the increasing prices. And interestingly, when we look at some of the growth numbers, it's perplexing because it showed that US has had a high growth since the tariffs were put in and at very low inflation. Most people and experts believe that the inflation numbers have been misrepresented, which is why the growth was showing up as very high, because clearly on the ground, the people were extremely unhappy with the high cost that has happened. So somehow there has been a mismatch between the official inflation numbers and what people are feeling on the ground. And with this reversal of the tariffs, what will happen is that many of the new trade deals that were being worked out are now irrelevant, because it will go back to the original tariffs that the US had as per the WTO, as per the rule of law, which would then reduce the cost of living in the US, which will lead to a higher consumption, which will then lead to greater sales for the US corporations. And therefore, that's how the market is responding. And also it implies that, again, there will be a surge in the economic power of the US, and therefore the US dollar will become stronger, and that's what the market is factoring in as they price the dollar as we move forward.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bhattacharya, for sharing that insight. Now I'd like to also welcome back Professor David K. Johnston for this. Professor Johnston, now looking at, given that tariffs was Trump's go-to, right? It was the central pillar of his economic and political, let's say, identity. So how might this decision reshape his strategy and his messaging moving forward?
Well, Donald is and will continue to be a mercantilist. That is the pre-Adam Smith view that if you have a piece of gold and I don't have it, the only way to get it is to take it from you. It's not based on wealth creation. Human beings have become very, very good at wealth creation. We're not very good at distributing it, but we're very good at creating it. And so Donald is going to continue to try to push what he calls his America First policy, to try to figure out how to get more goods made in the US and have fewer goods imported. One of the difficulties he's going to face is that in the year plus he's been back in office, manufacturing jobs have declined in the United States, not gone up, they've declined. And as Dr. Bhattacharya very well pointed out, we really are not in a position with this administration to trust the numbers they're putting out about inflation and productivity and other matters, because Trump has removed competent, highly competent economists and technocrats and replaced them in key positions with toadies who will do whatever he wants. There is a clear misalignment in the data. And that was one of the great strengths of the American economy, was that we had highly reliable economic data, which we constantly refined, updated, and improved. So Donald will continue to be hostile to other countries. He'll continue to denigrate Canada, India, China, when he thinks it will gain him a deeper bond with his base. But his base is only about a little over 20% of the American adult public. And because of the economic performance being not good, despite his promises of this golden age, and his bellicose activities, like all the military hardware that's right now in the water off the Iranian shore, his numbers in the US in polls, even polls known to favor Republicans, are collapsing. I don't mean they're slipping, they are collapsing. And of course, on top of all that is the Epstein files, a story that will only get worse for him as we go forward.
Yes, we will be eyeing that. Thank you for sharing that. We are taking another breaking news coming in from EU. Now, breaking news, the European Union says it is carefully analyzing the recent ruling by the US Supreme Court on tariffs as global markets react to the decision. In a statement, an EU spokesperson said the bloc continues to advocate for low tariffs and remains committed to efforts aimed at reducing trade barriers. The spokesperson has added that the EU is in close contact with the US administration and is seeking clarity on the steps Washington intends to take in response to the court's ruling. Now we welcome Mr. Jayjit Bhattacharya, Dr. Jayjit Bhattacharya for this. Dr. Bhattacharya, would you like to add something on to Mr. Johnston, Professor Johnston's take on, what can be Trump's card moving forward, and also what do you think about this breaking news that I've just taken from Europe?
Yeah, what Professor Johnston just mentioned is bang on in terms of how the impact of institutional degradation in US will be on the trust level in US, and therefore the trust level in all the figures that are coming out, and therefore trust levels of the businesses, which is how it's getting reflected in how corporates are behaving in US, which is being very, very cautious. There's been very limited investments that have happened in the last 1 year in the US because there has been so much of uncertainty, and that has also got reflected into the job numbers. So that's clearly a very, very lucid way in which Professor Johnston has laid out the degradation in institutions that has happened in the US.
Yes, and I would like to also bring welcome back Professor Johnston for this. Professor Johnston, how do you think Europe already, right, with Greenland law and with tariffs, Europe and transatlantic relation was going on the low? What is next? What do you think?
Well, the Europeans and the Canadians have been busy making trade deals with China and with Japan, in which the US has had no seat. One of these deals goes back to Trump's first administration. Trump is very upset and angry about that. He's gone after the Canadian Prime Minister because of its new trade deal with Canada. He thinks other countries should subordinate their own national interest to his desires, and that's just never going to happen. So he'll continue to be bellicose and he'll be difficult. The next, I think, real crisis problem the Europeans are going to face is Trump has made it clear that on any terms, he wants the Ukraine war ended. And that includes forcing Ukraine to give up territory the Russian army has been unable to capture. If that happens, it's very clear from Vladimir Putin's statements and those of key people around him that once they rebuild their military, they're going to continue their campaign to rebuild the old Soviet empire. to conquer other countries. And if you get the prime minister of the three Baltic states, any one of the three, to be on your program, I'm sure they'll tell you that they believe without U.S. support, it's just a matter of time before the Russian tanks roll in and they are under the boot of the Kremlin again. So the Europeans now have to worry that Donald's mercurial nature and his anger, where he strikes out without any clear overarching policy other than mercantilism, is an existential threat to them, and the prospect of going back to the centuries of endless wars in Europe that have been prevented since 1945 by NATO. So this is new problems are going to arise, and unfortunately, the Trump White House does not have the competence to manage these problems, and that's what most of world affairs are about. It's not about solving problems; it's about managing problems.
That Dr. Bhattacharya, what's your take? Now without Mr. Professor Johnston said, Trump's without any clear policy moving forward, how will this be affecting Europe, Russia, Ukraine, Baltic nations?
As we are seeing that as part of the US's own judicial process, the economic steps taken up by the Trump administration has been kind of shot down, because the foundation of the Trump's economic outreach as well as geopolitical outreach was tariffs, and that has been declared to be illegal by the US Supreme Court. And therefore the next set of steps, which is threatening Iran, and I guess from what it looks like, that in a day or two, if not earlier, there would be conflict between the US and Iran, and then the existing conflicts that are going on, and to the claims that the US administration had made, and specifically Trump had made before he joined in as the president of the US, that he will stop the Ukraine-Russia war in one single day, and that day has not yet come in. There has also been, in the backdrop of that, several air crashes and so on, which were then blamed on DEI policies, and those policies were also overturned. So both domestically and from a geopolitical perspective, the series of policy decisions that have been taken in the last 1 year by the US administration seems to be, one, getting challenged domestically, and second, from a global perspective, creating it's leading to a lot of turmoil, and therefore that turmoil is also having impact on the global economy. Cost of various commodities, including oil, has shot up. That has led to its impact on various other commodities as a domino effect, and so it's looks like that we will continue on in a geopolitically unstable situation for some more time, while these policies of the US administration continue to be on a path which doesn't really provide stability. It seems to be encouraging conflicts where none is really needed, and that's a matter of concern.
Yes, we will be eyeing that. I would like to also bring in Mr. Professor Johnston, David Johnston, to this. So, Professor Johnston, you touched upon briefly some of the problems that are going to be coming in because of this in the foreign policy. What else? Can you brief us more about that?
Well, on one level, Trump has this belief that his reputation and his power are based on ending wars. He claims to have ended, in one conversation, 10 wars, several of which have never happened. They're just made up in his mind. And if he can force regime change in Tehran, and I don't think the government in Tehran is at all stable. The average age of Iranians, the median age, half are older, half are younger, is only 32. So there's a lot of young people who they're fed up with the Ayatollahs and how they want to take the country back to the 9th century. He's hoping to overthrow that regime. The problem is the person being put forward to do that is the son of the previous dictator, the Shah, who was a vicious, vile dictator. He's hoping in Cuba, by cutting off its access to ships with food and energy supplies, particularly from Venezuela, that he can kill the communist regime in Havana and replace it. Again, the proposed people who might be put forward are connected to the fascistic Batista regime, which was utterly corrupt and which Castro overthrew in 1959. In Ukraine, he wants to be able to say, see, I brought peace to Ukraine, but the price is the Ukrainians would not only have to give up occupied Russian territory, but territory the Russian army has been unable after 4 years to capture. But Trump is going to continue his effort to position himself as this man of peace. No matter how many bombs he drops in Yemen, no matter how many conflicts he stirs up and promotes, in his own mind, in his own fictional narrative. And I remind your audience, I've known and covered Donald for almost 40 years. I've spent hundreds of hours with him. He has these just delusional beliefs about the world, and he's not going to change about that. He's going to continue in those activities, and they are not bringing about peace. They are not bringing about a better future world, and they are certainly, especially in the case of Gaza, encouraging the continuation of ancient enmities between different parties.
Thank you for highlighting that. We will be taking a breaking news from UK now. Now, breaking news, the UK's government has responded to the United States Supreme Court ruling striking down President Donald Trump's global tariffs, saying it will work closely with the US administration to understand the implications for Britain and global trade. In a series of statements, London has stressed that the ruling is ultimately a matter for the United States to determine. However, it said it expects the UK's privileged trading position with the US to continue under any scenario. The government has also pledged continued support for British businesses as further details emerge on how the decision could reshape tariff arrangements. Now we're taking another breaking news. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer has welcomed the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to strike down most of President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs, calling it a win for American consumers. In a post on the X, the New York Democrat has described the ruling as a victory for the wallets of every American consumer, arguing that the tariffs had placed an unfair burden on families. Schumer said the collapse of what he termed as an illegal tariff policy should mark an end to what he characterizes as economic uncertainty and trade tensions, urging a halt to the ongoing trade war. Now I'd like to welcome Dr. Jayjit Bhattacharya. He's an economist and policy expert, joins us live from New Delhi for this. Dr. Bhattacharya, now going back to this, so President Trump and two presidents, don't you think there has to be somebody who would have seen this coming, or who could have told him that these can be illegal, or he doesn't have the authority to make such? Can this scenario be or happen in India?
Yeah, I'm sure people would have told him that there is a distinct possibility that the provisions of the Emergency Economic Act that he was using to impose these tariffs may not be upheld in the court of law. But also, I think in parallel, he was trying to ensure that the Supreme Court is favorably disposed to whatever policies he takes up. In fact, there has been judgments in the previous year which allowed Trump to take unilateral decisions without going to the Congress, which had raised many an eyebrows that's really not allowed under the U.S. construct of how governance is to be carried out. So I'm sure he would have heard those voices, and I'm sure that he would have thought he can brave that and be able to get a positive judgment. But now that has not happened, it throws open all the trade deals that has happened, the tariff threats that have happened, they are ab initio null and void now, so they don't hold any water. And therefore, the world will be reverting back to the tariff rates that was there before, that is in relation to the US. But having said that, it still does not heal many of the rupturing that has happened, both from an economic perspective and a security perspective. Canada being a poster child of what really is the outcome of this disruption, where an ally of the US, which was joined in the hip, both literally and figuratively, has decided to move away from the arms and armaments of the US, from the supply chain of US, from shaking hands with China for trade, for taking off much of the natural resources that Canada was selling to the US, including energy resources, excuse me, and uranium and so on and so forth. So the rupture is permanent, even though the US would probably be reverting back to the pre-Trump era in terms of trade with the rest of the world. But also, I believe what will probably happen is that the Trump administration will figure out some other way of bringing in tariffs. It will be very interesting to watch how they're going to react in the next few days to what the US Supreme Court has passed by knocking off the tariffs that the Trump administration had put.
Yes, we will be eyeing that. And Dr. Bhattacharya, also looking at India-US relations, right? What do you think, what will or how will that unfold in terms of tariffs? Because India was given first, I think it was, if I recall correctly, it was 25%, and then it added some more, US added some more to it about its, saying that it's for the oil, trading with Russia, etc. So how do you think that will unfold?
So before February, India was paying 50% tariff to access the US markets. That has now been reduced to 25%, which is still quite significant. And typically you have higher rates to access the market when you are a developing country, because your industry is still developing, and therefore that protection is needed. So it was surprising that the US was behaving as if it's a developing economy. But having said that, the equation was that as of today, before these before the Supreme Court judgment came in of the US, India was, or Indian exporters were paying 25% tariff to access the US market. Now that excluded things like pharmaceutical, electronics, barytes, which is critical for the energy sector of the US. And moving forward, if the Supreme Court judgment natural outcome is factored in, we will revert back to an average rate of 3%, 3 to 4% with the US, and that's going to bring some normalcy back to the trade that we had before these changes came in.
Yes.
So there will be a significant change that will happen.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bhattacharya, for sharing that insight throughout. I'd like to also welcome Mr. Peter Cardillo. He's a chief economist at Spartan Capitals, joins us live from New York. Thank you very much, Mr. Cardillo, for joining us. Now, looking at this, with more than $175 billion collected under the now invalidated tariffs, what economic and political fallout could arise?
Well, first of all, we have to see how the United States is going to pay back these tariffs. And President Trump has stated that in the past. So I'm not sure how they're going to do it. But of course, it could mean that they'd have to go to the public markets and sell more U.S. debt. And that obviously would mean a crowded bond market, and that would obviously mean higher yields ahead. So we just have to wait and see. And of course, President Trump and his team has said in the past that there are other ways they can impose these tariffs. Now, how they're going to do that, I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on that. And remember that um, the Supreme Court ruling basically upheld the lower court, in which the lower court said that the rule that the administration was hanging its hat on imposing taxes is not valid, is not a valid reason to put reciprocal tariffs. So, it's early in the game. We have to see how the administration is going to handle this.
Yes, we will behind that. I would like to also welcome back Dr. Bhattacharya for this. So, Dr. Bhattacharya, building on all our previous discussions, what does this simultaneous rise in U.S. Treasury yields, including the 10-year and 30-year bonds, suggest about investor expectations? Yes. Mr. Peter Cardillo, I would like to go back to you for this. So what does the simultaneous rise in U.S. Treasury yields suggest about investor expectations?
Well, if you look at what the Treasury market is doing right now, we're actually up. And the reason why we're up, I guess, is because of speculation of what I just said. Remember that today we also had some macro news that came out, and which was not all that conducive in a sense that would warrant the yields to spike up. We did have higher than expected inflation, but on a year-to-year basis, inflation still, at least from the court rate, stood under 3%. So that wouldn't be too alarming. But the big point here is that the fourth quarter GDP came crashing down to 1.4%. Now, let's understand each other that in part of that, there was a shutdown for 48 days, and that attributed to that. But it shouldn't have shaved more than maybe 1 or 1.5 percentage points. So if you take 1.5 percentage point from 4.8, 4.9, we should have come in close to about 3.3, 3.4% GDP. We came in half of that. So what is that suggesting? That's suggesting that the shape-cape economic growth that we're in is favoring a special group, that is the wealthy and the very wealthy. And the rest of Main Street is struggling. And so that could mean trouble in terms of the labor market going forward, and it puts the feds in somewhat of a bind, because if this were to continue, obviously you'd be dealing with stagflation as we are now, but probably even at a more steeper level. And so what would the Fed do if they have to raise more money? If the Treasury has to raise more money to pay off the tariffs and support the economy at the same time, it's a tricky act. And so that means that yields probably could remain elevated, despite the fact that growth is lower, and that could hinder the labor market.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cardillo, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you. We have a breaking news coming in from Germany. German Engineering Association, VDMA, responsible for majority of the German car manufacturing industry, has stated that while this judgment is important, the uncertainty remains for companies like the VDMA. Has also raised fears that a 15% tariff may be reintroduced on the industry. We have a breaking news coming in from Canada. According to a government statement, the decision by the U.S. Supreme Court on tariffs has reinforced Canada's position that tariffs imposed by the United States under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act are unjustified. Canadian officials said the ruling supports their long-standing view that the measures lack a legal basis and undermine fair trade. The statement adds that Canada will continue to press its case through diplomatic and legal channels. Now we welcome back Mr. Cardillo. He's a chief economist at Spartan Capitals, joins us live from New York. Thank you very much, Mr. Cardillo, for staying with us. Now, looking at this, how do you think Canada and US's relationship will be moving forward, although it's a lot of things are still under the clouds for now?
Yeah, well, obviously it's going to be a rocky relationship, but I think when it at the end we'll probably get back on good terms with Canada. Now that the Supreme Court has ruled that you can't justify reciprocal tariffs under the law that was being used, we just have to wait and see how the administration is going to work around it. I suspect that gives Canada an upper hand now to say, well, look, your Supreme Court said this is illegal, so let's compromise and maybe have lower tariffs on the way. And I guess that's probably what we're looking in the near future.
Yes, indeed, we will be eyeing that. With that, I'd like to thank Mr. Peter Cardillo for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move on. We have another breaking news. President Donald Trump has stated that he's considering a limited military strike against Iran. Although he did not provide further details on the scope or timing of such action, when asked whether the strike would be a measure to pressure Iran into reaching a deal on its nuclear program, President Trump has simply said, and I quote, "I guess I can say I'm considering it." His remarks came at the White House amid tensions over Iran's nuclear activities and the possibility of a U.S. response. The comment has raised concerns about escalating military conflict in the region. Now we welcome Mr. Raymond Vickery. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from, and a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Mr. Vickery, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, this comment is again further raising concerns amid escalating tensions. What are we to make of the situation? And of course, if that happens, it's not only going to impact Iran, it's going to be affecting, not just Iran, but the neighboring countries as well.
Well, thanks for having me. It's certainly true that it will affect the entire Middle East, Western Asia, and indeed the entire world, because these strikes are not taking place in a vacuum. They have an impact on world oil prices. There will be retaliation. And the idea that President Trump can simply conduct this as he would a transaction between two real estate developers, in this case between Iran and President Trump's administration, is completely false and completely a pipe dream. The latest statements from President Trump indicate that he has given himself a couple of weeks or so to decide what to do here. The waging of peace, though, like the waging of war, requires a strategy, partners, and principles. In this case, there doesn't seem to be anything. It seems to be the sort of working out of the madman theory of international relations, that you keep your opponent off balance because they don't know what extreme measures you might take. The problem with that, of course, is that there is so much room for miscalculation. And if you get into a major shooting war with Iran, it quickly develops and involves all the countries of the Persian Gulf, and then more widely countries around the world who are dependent upon oil exports, who are dependent upon being able to have the international system go forward in some sort of logical and rule of law fashion. So this can't be contained just to Iran. It can't be just a kind of strike which President Trump had earlier said solved the nuclear problem. Well, it didn't solve the nuclear problem with Iran. That's the reason, in part, that we're back into it today. So there is a time period here. One hopes that saner voices on both sides will be able to at least delay hostilities. And if you delay them long enough, then there are other ways to resolve these kinds of disputes. But that's not the Trump approach. The Trump approach, President Trump's approach, is to create as much chaos as possible and then to try to portray himself as coming out on top in a problem which he has largely created himself.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vickery, for sharing that. Please stay with us. We have a breaking news coming in from United States. The United States Supreme Court's decision striking down a broad set of President Donald Trump's imports tariffs is now creating fresh uncertainty for monetary policymakers. Atlanta's Federal Reserve President Raphael Bostic has said the ruling raises critical questions about price pressures, supply chains, and potential financial disruption. Speaking in Birmingham, Alabama, Bostic has questioned whether firms that paid tariffs would need to be refunded, a move he warned could cause significant disruption. He has also asked whether businesses might revert to previous supply models if the tariffs are removed, and whether the administration could pursue alternative legal avenues to reinstate similar duties. The comments highlight the Federal Reserve's challenge in assessing inflation risks and economic stability amid shifting U.S. trade policy. For this, we welcome back Mr. Raymond Vickery. He's an international affairs expert and former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce. Joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Mr. Vickery, for staying with us. Now, we have seen this breaking news coming in today, and what's the reaction of you, and also what's the reaction of U.S. Citizens domestically?
Well, thanks very much for allowing me to comment on this. It seems to me that this is a great day in American democracy because for the first time in a long time, the checks and balances which have been in the United States Constitution are kicking in to provide some restraint to an authoritarian approach of President Trump. For too long, the judicial branch and the legislative branch have stepped back and let President Trump go forward as he would deem fit. It's obvious that this is not in accordance with the Constitution of the United States, and it's not even in accordance with laws passed by the Congress. But make no mistake about it, this tiger will not change its stripes. President Trump will double down, and he will try to find other ways to accomplish the same sort of result that he tried on this so-called Liberation Day back on April the 2nd when he announced these reciprocal tariffs. It should be noted that there is room in the Supreme Court decision for him to go down other paths. The steel and aluminum tariffs are invoked under a different section. The kind of tariffs which were invoked to counteract purchases of Russian oil are on a different legal foundation. So the president is an expert at conducting lawfare, and just as he has done in private practice, he will try to work his way around this. But overall, this is a positive development. You can see it in the reaction of the markets. And the paying back of these tariffs is not an insurmountable problem. The people who've paid these tariffs are American citizens, small businesses by and large, other businesses. And while it's a large sum of money, it pales in comparison with the size of the U.S. Budget or the U.S. economy. So that can be accomplished. But there's no question that this approach, which was illegal in the first place, has created a very unusual and very difficult situation.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Vickery, for sharing that insight with us. I would like to also welcome Mr. Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst, joins us live from Taipei for this. Thank you, Mr. Feingold, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, how does this latest Supreme Court this ruling against President Trump's use of International Emergency Economic Powers Act fit into the broader pattern of legal and institutional checks on his approach to executive power? Do you think this should have done before this was put into place? Now, what can we expect?
I think the president will continue to try to use executive authority to the greatest extent possible and force other stakeholders to take legal action. I don't think the approach is going to change. So whether that's immigration policy, for example, or tariffs, which we're talking about at the moment, environmental regulation, where there's been a significant amount of decisions by the administration in recent days, I think the administration is not going to be turning cautious in the aftermath of this Supreme Court ruling. I mean, look, the trend over many decades already, even before President Trump, both for Republicans as well as Democrats in the White House, has been to use or try to use executive power to the greatest extent possible. And that's why it's often called the imperial presidency. And with bad relations between the president and members of Congress when they're not from the same party, which is often the case, the president, whoever it is, has taken the view that I'm going to not be able to work with Congress, so I'm going to use executive authority. And also, what I think we're going to be talking about and hearing many other people say in the coming hours and days is that there are alternative paths for a president to achieve his goal, whether in this situation with tariffs or on other public policy issues. There's always other or alternative legal authorities or sections of the law that the president could try and use. And again, force people to sue, force people to take action to challenge what the White House does. So certainly it's a setback for the president, but is it going to change his approach to a robust use of executive authority? I think that's highly unlikely.
Thank you for highlighting that, and now I'd like to welcome back Mr. Vickery for this. As you know, Mr. Ross and Mr. Vickery, both of you have highlighted that this the tiger isn't going to change its pattern. So given these tariffs were indeed a central pillar of Trump's economic and political identity, do you think that this will force him to change his messaging strategy moving forward? And does U.S. Republicans have anyone else to replace him right now?
Well, I think that the tiger not changing his stripes is exactly right. He's going to double down on this. In the past, when court decisions have gone against him, he's attacked the courts as being out of step with the American people, out of step with democracy. He'll try the same sort of thing. Nevertheless, this is a significant development. And coupled with the midterms, it shows that American institutions are starting to take hold and rein in an unconstitutional authoritarian approach to government. I predict that this will have an impact down the road. One impact will be to give greater heart and strength to the lower courts in the United States. The appellate courts and the district courts have, by and large, not ruled with the executive, with President Trump, but they've held back in terms of taking immediate action to rein in, saying that the Supreme Court is the final decision in regard to the American judicial system. Now those courts have something upon which to act in terms of temporary restraining orders, preliminary injunctions, and so the president can't just say it's going to be business as usual, even though he is an expert at using the courts for his own purposes. This will also give courage to those who are in the Republican majority in the House and in the Senate to have some basis upon which to stand up for their own constituents. It must be remembered that this tariff case was brought by a collection of small businesses who have been very much harmed and who are in many cases very important to the Republican base in states and congressional districts throughout the U.S. And so those folks will have a further reason to stand up. And so to me, it's a very important development, but not dispositive in the short run, because as has been said, President Trump's history is when he has a defeat, not to acknowledge that defeat in any way, but to double down and try to accomplish his goal through other means. I think this will also give courage to other countries, particularly great democracies like India and in Western Europe and in Japan, not to simply say we'll go along to try to keep out of the line of fire. It gives courage and strength to people such as Mark Carney in regard to Canada and his approach to the United States. So sure, in the shorter run, you're going to have President Trump, the tiger will continue to roar, and he will continue to try to use the mechanisms that have brought him so much success, both in the private sector and in politics, to be able to accomplish his ends. But in the longer run, unless President Trump gets us into some sort of existential war, we'll be able to work our way out of it. So I think overall this is a positive development.
Thank you very much for sharing that to both our guests. Please stay with us as we have a breaking news coming in. Now, President Donald Trump was visibly frustrated after being informed of the United States Supreme Court's ruling striking down his sweeping tariffs, according to reports citing sources close to the White House. President Trump was reportedly meeting with U.S. governors at the White House when an aide handed him a note about the court's decision. The source said the president reacted with visible irritation and told the room he would have to do something about the courts, signaling his displeasure with the judgment. The ruling represents a significant setback to President Trump's trade agenda and marks a major judicial check on his use of emergency powers to impose global tariffs. Now we welcome back Mr. Raymond Vickery and Mr. Ross for this discussion. I'd like to go to Mr. Ross Feingold for this. What's your take on this, reports that have come in that what was President Trump's reaction, and what can he realistically do about the courts?
That's a great question, and also gives me an opportunity to respond to Mr. Vickery. Again, this is certainly a setback for President Trump. He's going to be very unhappy about it, and he's going to criticize the Supreme Court, some of those justices who are usually friendly to him. He's going to criticize them, even though they often do rule in his favor. But as far as the courts go more broadly, keeping in mind that President Trump is now in his second term, and he's already been in office for a year, he's actually appointed approximately 200 district court judges in the federal courts and approximately 60 appellate court judges. So often, as is the case, when you're a Republican administration and you're going in the courts, in front of the judge, you hope for the best and you get lucky, and that it's a judge that you appointed, which, given the partisanship that we see in the judiciary, if it's a judge that Trump appointed, chances are they're going to rule in Trump's favor. That's just the reality. If he gets in front of a judge that was nominated and confirmed by Democrats, whether Biden or Obama, then chances are Trump is going to lose. So it's certainly my view that the courts are not really going to change how they approach the administration, because the courts have become so partisan anyway. And judges nominated by Trump or earlier Republicans are just more inclined to rule in favor of the administration, and vice versa. Whether it's a Democrat president, then Republican judges often rule against the Democrat president, and Democrat judges rule in favor of a Democrat president. That's just the nature of the courts. Now, when it comes to other countries or how Trump might approach trade negotiations, we have to keep in mind that many countries have already reached agreements with the Trump administration. And I'd certainly be curious to hear Mr. Vickery's view on this. So it might give people like Prime Minister Carney more reason to be a tougher negotiator, because now they might take the view that Trump has lost a tool that Trump thought he had. But on the other hand, for those countries that have already reached an agreement with the United States, where their governments have willingly agreed to pay higher tariffs than the tariffs that existed previously and before Trump imposed higher tariffs and forced them into negotiated agreements, those negotiated agreements are bilateral agreements which are probably going to stand, and they're not affected by today's ruling.
Thank you very much, Mr. Feingold, for sharing that insight. I would like to welcome Mr. Vickery. Mr. Vickery, what's your take? Would you like to say or add something to the insights that has been shared by Mr. Ross?
Well, first of all, I've practiced law for 30 years. It is not the case, even in today's world, that just because you have a judge who's appointed by a Republican or a Democrat, that they're going to rule in favor of the Democrat or the Republican. That trend has not always been favorable to the rule of law, but it's still there, and you still have a lot of judges on the bench, both at lower district court and appellate levels, who are going back to appointments by George W. Bush, Obama, and so forth. And my point was that many of these judges have ruled against Trump, but they have not been willing to make their decisions immediately effective. They have deferred an injunction. They have deferred in terms of action, pending what happens to appeals and what the Supreme Court would say. So my point is, I think that those courts now will, instead of deferring, saying, well, we can make this injunction effective now, rather than waiting for an appeal, because we have some decision of the Supreme Court to base that on. In regard to other countries, the fact that you have reached an agreement with the United States of America in terms of tariff is not the end of the story. It is perfectly apparent under the Trump approach to international agreements that international agreements can be abrogated when it's necessary for the America First agenda to go forward. And so there is no enforcement body which says, okay, you reach this agreement, and therefore you, India, or you, Indonesia, or Western Europe, you're going to have to abide by this. It really goes into then a question of international politics. And you can bet that many countries are going to say, well, wait a minute, your own Supreme Court said you didn't have the authority to act in this regard, that the whole Liberation Day tariffs are not legal or constitutional. And so I don't think I'm going to abide by that decision. Then the question becomes a political one. Does the Trump administration have other ways in which to try to enforce this agreement? And the result will vary depending upon which country is on the other side of that so-called agreement. And I say so-called agreement because if you just look at the Indian so-called agreement, there really isn't an agreement. There was an announcement by President Trump of what the agreement was. And then there was a joint statement which did not track what President Trump said. And then there was an executive order that took back part of the tariffs, but not all of it. And then if you read further, the so-called agreement said that this was just a framework for an interim agreement and not even the final agreement. So you have international diplomacy, which is going to vary in regard to the effectiveness of these tariffs. But you can be assured that those who are negotiating with President Trump are not just going to ignore the fact that the highest court in the land has said that he has no legal basis upon which to put this tariff. So it does have an impact. The overall impact, of course, will be determined not in the very near future, but in what happens in working out in terms of restraint with other decisions of the judicial branch, what happens in the Congress. The Congress is not going to, in my judgment, immediately roll over for President Trump and give him authority to do what he wants. There are American political pressures, particularly from small and medium-sized businesses in each of these congressional districts, which are going to go the other way. And everybody is looking at what happens in November to the midterm elections. So the American system is working out. Not to mention you have the kinds of demonstrations which are going to be set up across the country. On March the 28th, you're going to have another No King's Day, which you're going to have millions of people turn out across the United States. You've already had drawbacks in regard to immigration, and so it is not a foregone conclusion that President Trump is simply going to be able to operate his business as usual, even though what he will try to do is to follow his mentor Roy Cohn, who taught him how to do the lawfare and to fight in the courts. He's going to do that in the short to midterm. But this is going to have an effect, and it's a very positive effect, in my view, in putting the United States back into a constitutional and rule of law approach, not only to tariffs, but other issues such as immigration, such as free speech, such as what happens in terms of the Federal Reserve. You're not going to see the kind of deference in the longer run that you have seen up to this point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vickery, for sharing that deep insight with us. Please stay with us as we have more breaking news coming in from US. Now, breaking news more on President Trump's reaction to the Supreme Court's ruling. The president has reportedly stated that he has a backup plan to enforce his tariff regime and has branded the ruling itself a disgrace, according to him. Now, we have another breaking news. The U.S. Supreme Court's decision striking down President Donald Trump's emergency tariffs has been welcomed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which called the ruling welcome news for businesses and consumers. The powerful business lobby group has urged the administration to use the moment to reset overall tariff policy in a way that promotes stronger economic growth, higher wages, and lower costs for families. The chamber has filed an amicus brief in support of small businesses that challenged the tariffs, arguing that the measures created uncertainty and financial strain. The reaction underscores growing corporate pressure for a more predictable and stable U.S. trade framework following the landmark court ruling. Now we have another breaking news. Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky has welcomed the United States Supreme Court's ruling striking down President Trump's emergency tariffs, calling it a clear rebuke of executive overreach. In a post on X, Paul said the court has struck down the use of emergency powers to enact taxes, arguing the Constitution gives Congress, not the president, authority over tariffs. He has added that the ruling would also prevent a future president from using emergency powers to push sweeping ideological policies. In a separate post, Paul said the judgment made clear what he believes should have been obvious from the start. His remarks highlight divisions within the Republican Party over the scope of presidential trade powers. Now looking at Germany, we are taking another breaking news. Germany's BGA, Wholesale and Foreign Trade Association, has called for a NATO-like trade alliance following the United States Supreme Court's ruling against President Donald Trump's global tariffs. BGA President Dirk Jandura has said democratic market economies should join forces in what he described as a trade NATO, arguing that uncertainty for German businesses remains despite the court's decision. While welcoming the 6-3 ruling as a clear signal of constitutional limits on executive power, Jandura has cautioned it would be premature to assume a fundamental shift in U.S. trade policy. The remarks reflect continued concerns across Europe about long-term stability in transatlantic trade relations. Now we go to our guest. We welcome back Mr. Ross Feingold for this. Thank you very much, Mr. Feingold, for staying with us. As Mr. Vickery was highlighting, how he's hopeful that this court decision will be putting U.S. back on track. However, President Trump, we saw in the breaking news his reaction. He mentioned that he has a backup plan. What do you think he means by that? And also, what do you think about the Europe's German trade associations head? He called for a NATO-like trade associate. Yes, what is your reaction?
Yeah, as far as a backup plan, there are other sections of federal law with regard to international trade that give the executive branch and the president authority to conduct investigations into trading partners for things like selling goods below their cost to manufacture, which is known as dumping. Also for things like subsidies, for example, where foreign governments provide their manufacturers with cheap land or tax breaks or other things that the U.S. considers an unfair subsidy that harms U.S. manufacturing. And these are authorities that many presidents have used. The challenge for President Trump and the distinction with using the authority that he tried to use, but which the Supreme Court has now ruled was invalid, is those other sections of the law require lengthy processes. It requires the administration and the relevant U.S. government agencies to conduct an investigation and announce their findings, and the companies from other countries that are targeted, they have the opportunity to respond. So those are lengthy and complex processes, but it's certainly a tool that President Trump has used in the past in his first administration, and is looking at it in his second administration, and he might expand the use of those powers. And again, though, I'd also emphasize that as far as trading partners that have reached an agreement, I think President Trump is going to hold those countries to those agreements, so where they have willingly agreed to pay higher tariffs compared to what they paid before President Trump came into office. I don't see how those countries are going to say to President Trump, yeah, we've changed our mind. You lost at the Supreme Court, because the U.S. is going to say a deal's a deal, and you agreed to pay higher tariffs, and we shook hands on that. Even if some of those deals are yeah, I agree, some of them are kind of more in the statement stage or the press release stage, and a lot of details were yet to be worked out. But when President Trump says he has a backup plan, I think one of those backup plans is to use the power of the United States to compel other countries to reach agreements to pay higher tariffs and to invest more in the U.S. And President Trump has done that with a number of countries over the past year. So again, I don't think a country like Japan or South Korea is going to say, sorry, we changed our mind about the deal we made with you. I think President Trump would certainly retaliate in many ways, trade or other ways, if those countries try to basically walk away from the deals that they have previously made. As far as the reaction from the German trade group that you just referred to, it's no surprise that they're happy that President Trump doesn't have the authority that President Trump thought he had. But again, the European Union has made a deal with President Trump, and I just can't imagine the European Union saying we've changed our mind. The deal we made is no longer in force because you lost the Supreme Court case, which really doesn't have much to do with the deal that the European Union or other countries have made with President Trump. So I think the German business leaders, just like leaders around the world, they're looking for additional markets besides the United States. That's why so many European leaders have visited China recently, and they'll compete with Americans for business in other places around the world, like Asia, South America, or Africa, and the Middle East. And that's kind of always been the situation anyway. European companies have had to compete with American companies or Chinese companies. That's just not going to change.
Thank you very much for sharing that deep insight with us, Mr. Feingold. I would like to also welcome Mr. John Rossomando. He's the president of Viking Research Associates, joins us live, and a geopolitical expert, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Mr. Rossomando, for joining us as well. Mr. Rossomando, what's your take on what Mr. Ross Feingold has shared with us? What do you think, do you think that Japan, South Korea, or Europe would change their stance, roll back on whatever has been agreed so far with U.S. in terms of trade agreements, the updated one ever since, President Trump took office, and do you think any country would actually do that?
Well, I think that the president is going to have to go back to conventional diplomacy, and I think there probably would be some fallout from this in terms of maybe countries no longer feeling threatened by Trump's tariffs and changing their policies. But I just think that President Trump suffered a defeat due to the separation of powers that we have in this country, and he's just going to have to recalibrate his strategy.
But what do you think other strategy does he have, since it seemed like this tariff card was his favorite card?
Well, I think that he's going to have to, work at trying to rebuild personal diplomacy with these leaders, kind of like what he tried in his first administration, and trying to win more with incentives than he can, with the stick, because now he doesn't have the stick to wield.
And Mr. Rosamondo, so do you think that the countries which changed their foreign policy or they realigned with China, like looking at Europe had to realign with China, India also realigned few foreign policies. So all these tariffs which affected other countries' foreign policy, do you think these countries will continue to do so? Do you think the trust that they had towards US is disrupted?
I think that it's disrupted as long as we have the current president, because President Trump made everything very personal. I mean, I think that, like in India, that Prime Minister Modi and the Indian people took the tariffs very personally, as a personal attack. We started out the Trump administration with, a resumption of what people thought was, strong alliance between the United States and India, only to get the tariffs. So I think that President Trump has burned a bridge.
And right, if you say so, right, if he has burned the bridge, but of course the countries have already, like looking at German Chancellor already has plans to go to China next week. Canada has, I think, struck a deal with China. Other European countries also, their relationship with China has warmed up because of US. Now, President Trump, how do you think President Trump will be reacting? Do you think he'll be sending a personal message to these countries?
Well, I hope he does, because I hope that he sees that the only thing that he's accomplished is the opposite of his intended effort to build closer ties or reassert American dominance. And when you have your primary strategy defeated, you have to come up with something else. And I'm hopeful the president will reflect on that and recalibrate.
And looking at U.S. domestically, what are the broader political consequences of this decision for the power balance between the White House and Congress?
Well, I think that what it does is it just sends a message that Congress sets American trade policy, not the President of the United States. The founders gave spending and taxation powers to the House of Representatives in our country, not to the President of the United States. So I think that the President's going to have to learn to collaborate more, and he's facing a tough midterm election that could return the House to the hands of the Democrats, who will tie the last 2 years of his administration with impeachments once again.
Yes, talking about the Congress, wasn't there anyone who was capable of advising President Trump about this before President Trump takes office, or before President Trump becomes or he uses these tariffs against so many countries and promotes that whatever income he gets would be given back to the society in US? So wasn't there anyone who could have told that this is Congress, this power lies with Congress and not him?
Well, you're dealing with Donald Trump. He's somebody who does what he wants, and who doesn't take advice that he doesn't want to hear.
But isn't it dangerous for US to have a president only surround himself with yes men?
Well, let's put it this way. Every president does that. I mean, the president's personality sets the agenda. So, you can't change the man. So, that's all that I can say about this.
Okay, and well, now that you know more than $175 million were collected under this now invalidated tariffs, so what economic fallout could arise?
Well, I think that that's kind of uncertain, remains to be seen what the economic fallout from this will be. I think it'll create some uncertainty, but like we had when Trump came into office, people were saying, well, the economy will be tanked, will be destroyed, and that really hasn't materialized. The economy will seek an equilibrium, and I don't know where that is heading.
Yes, thank you very much for sharing that insight with us, Mr. Rossomando. We would like to also welcome Mr. Ross Feingold. He's joining us live from Taipei as a political analyst. Thank you very much, Mr. Feingold, for joining us once again and staying with us. How do you think this will be unfolding, or how do you think the refund will be processed if it would start being processed?
Well, probably a lot of lawyers are going to make money advising clients on how to claw back some of the tariffs that they may have paid when they imported goods. And if the administration has the resources to do so, I would expect them to fight, to challenge the calculations, and to make that a very drawn-out process. For small companies, that'll be very difficult to do because it'll be time-intensive, and it might cost them money as well. So that'll be an interesting process to watch as it plays out in the coming weeks after we've all had a chance to read in detail what the Supreme Court judgment has said. But more broadly speaking, President Trump is not the kind of person who likes to admit defeat. He's probably highly unlikely to say, I was wrong. And I would still expect him to look to have a somewhat protectionist trade policy. He's simply not going to become a fan of free trade in the aftermath of this decision.
Thank you very much, Mr. Feingold, for sharing that insight with us. I would like to also welcome Mr. Dr. Arvind Mahajan. He's a Regents Professor at Texas A&M University College Station, joins us live from US. Thank you very much, Professor Mahajan, for joining us. Now, what immediate economic impact could this Supreme Court's decision have on inflation, supply chains, and business investment in the United States?
Well, I think we might be getting ahead of ourselves in trying to answer those questions, because all what we know is that the Supreme Court, with a 6-3 decision, has turned down parts of the president's tariff agenda. We really have to wait on details of which components of the tariffs have been considered illegal. And that really is unclear because all the tariffs have not been thrown out. It is pieces of them. So that's one part of the story. Clearly, for those who oppose tariffs, and I was one of them, this is good news. And the market is reacting to it. The market's suddenly gone up, notwithstanding the fact that there was rather bad news about the GDP. The markets reacted positively because overall, I think the market does not like protectionism. But I must say, we have to wait as to how this gets played out, because my guess is that the administration was not just sitting awaiting a decision. I think to some extent they were anticipating that. And I'm curious what their plan B is. One of the issues could be that the Congress approves it. And if the Congress approves tariffs, then basically the Supreme Court's judgment is null and void. The problem has been that the Congress did not approve these tariffs. Now, the probability of that happening, I think, is quite low, but nevertheless, it is a positive probability. And what I'm interested in finding out is what is the plan 2 or plan B of the administration in light of this outcome. So I think changes will occur if tariffs are clearly removed. It will impact supply chains. It will impact, well, the question is then what happens to the trade deals which the US has undertaken with other countries? Can they be renegotiated? I must say, under the guise of imposing tariffs, the US has got favorable trade deals with other countries. And the question is, how does that get played out? So in my mind, there are quite a few unknowns at this point before I try to figure out what companies will do, how they'll invest their money, where they'll invest their money, how does this change the supply chains. I think we just need to wait and see how this gets played out. It is positive news, of course, for those who did not think that imposing high tariffs on our trading partners, especially trading partners who were also our allies, was a good decision. And I think for them, this is good news.
Yes. Thank you very much, Doctor, for sharing that insight. Now I'd like to... Okay, so Doctor, does this ruling fundamentally weaken the executive branch's leverage in trade negotiations, particularly with China and other major partners?
I'm sorry, can you?
Yes, let me repeat my question here. Does this ruling fundamentally weaken the executive branch's leverage in trade negotiations, particularly with China and other major partners?
Oh, there's no question about it. Absolutely. I think one of the big leverage points was imposition of tariffs. And if they are taken away, then the administration has to go to plan B and how it can use leverage to get its desired outcomes. So there's no question about the fact that this is not, the Supreme Court ruling is not good news for this administration. And that does weaken the hand with which it was playing with the other major competitors of the United States.
Yes, indeed.
However, as I said, there are other alternatives and options.
Yes.
So it is too early to tell how this is going to get played out.
Yes. So how do you think, how will this affect the relationship of India and US? As you know, the trade deal was, I think, they announced it in not X or in Truth Social, but they didn't, nothing more had come out of it. Do you think that these countries who had already struck a deal with US would roll their deals back?
Well, so again, stepping back, putting meaningful trade deals takes years of planning and making sure that they are countries are legally bound to fulfill them. Many of the trade deals which were announced by the US really do not meet that criteria. They are understandings. They are not, many of them are not legally bound. So in the case of the India, we still don't know. We have a broad outline of the parameters of the trade deal. A lot more came out of it from President Trump. Little came out of it from the Indian side. And we still are awaiting what the actual understandings have been. In particular, in the context of red lines on agriculture in the case of India. So the trade deal with India, I think it probably could be behind the scenes renegotiated, because a lot of stuff has indeed been going on behind the scenes. You know, there have been political statements which have been coming out, mostly from the US side, but behind the scenes, I think the trade teams of both the countries, India and the US, have been working very hard in hammering out what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And that has not been put out yet. So I think, this certainly gives an opportunity for India as it does other countries, to look at their understandings with the US in a slightly different perspective.
Yes.
Because the trade deals have not been really signed. The Indian trade deal has really not been signed. There's been broad understanding.
Yes, indeed. And how do you think, how could this ruling influence future US trade policy and the stability of global trade relationships of US?
Yeah, so again, that remains to be seen. There have been aspects from the US perspectives of the president's tariff policy being good, in the sense that it has got some favorable trade deals with our trading partners, which it did not have before. From that perspective, this has been good. However, from the perspective of keeping our allies happy, I think there has been ground, if you will, to some extent has evaporated with the blunt talk which has come out of the administration. So that cannot be put back to where it was. The trade deals can be, the trade situations can be rejigged, but I think the damage done to the relationships, that will be difficult to recalibrate.
Right. And so how likely is that the administration can reimpose similar tariffs? As you know, we saw in the breaking news that President Trump said he has a backup plan. So does he actually, is there any other cards that he can play to make sure that this carries on in terms of, for him?
Well, one obviously is that you get the legislative branch on board and get them to approve it, and then the tariff enterprise becomes legal, if you will. I think the probability of that is going to be very challenging to do that. I don't know what other alternatives the administration has thought about, but I'm sure they probably have been thinking about this outcome as being, the Supreme Court outcome as being one of the possibilities. I do not know. It's hard to conjecture what their internal planning has been if this occurs. But hopefully soon that mystery will get resolved.
Indeed, Doctor, we will be eyeing that. Thank you very much, Dr. Arvind, for joining us today on NewsX World and sharing that insight with us. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.